You might have noticed that we're actually getting a warning from React in our current code. This is because of our dynamic array mapping here. Every time you display a list of things dynamically, React needs a little bit of help. It needs you to identify every element with a key. This key helps React identify the element when this array of children changes. So we can simply use the ID for every contest in this key, contest.id. And let's go ahead and test. So now that warning is gone. So just remember, every time you have a map call, you need to provide a unique key to identify the child element inside that map. One bit of advice here, do not use the array index as a unique key. Try to find another unique key to identify an element in an array. In our case, our data had an ID, and usually an API data is going to give you an ID for every object, so just use that. So now we have a React component that renders an array of contests, and we have the data which we're reading into memory directly before rendering the React application. However, practically, this data is going to be fetched from an API, and this process is going to take a little bit of time. React application is going to render before we have the data. So assuming that we don't have the data yet, what are we going to do? We'll have to render the React application with an empty array, just like that. Let's actually test. So no errors. React is actually rendering an empty list of contests. And now assuming after a while we get the data back from the API, we'll have to render it inside this React component. So to do so, we need to update something in the component. And remember, the only thing we can update inside the component is the state of that component. So instead of rendering the contests from props, we're going to render it from the state. So I'm going to remove it from here, go to the app component, and put the contests on the state of this app component, and read the contests directly from the state instead of the props. So this should be exactly the same, no errors, and the app is rendering an empty list of contests. And in here, I'm going to actually import the data directly from test data one more time. This is now up one level. So although I'm reading the data directly from memory, I'm going to assume that this process happened after React rendered all the components to simulate an API call. So since we're already mounted, a proper place to do any modification now is inside component did mount. So inside component did mount, when the data is accessible, I'm going to go ahead and do this .set state, and contests is coming from data.contests, just like that. So after React gets mounted, we can control when this happens exactly. And when we have access to the data, we just use set state to put the data back inside the React state. Let's test. So now the app component is reading this list from the state. And we have a plan to work with any delay in fetching the data from an API. Also, having this data on the state allow us to control the list. For example, let's go to the React DevTools, hover over the app component to get the $R. And in here, I'm going to do $R.setState. And in here, we're going to do contests is $R.state.contests, which is the current list, .slice1. So when you do slice1, you're basically deleting the first element in the array. So once I hit enter, this first element in the array is going to go away. Because this contests is part of the state, React is going to do this automatically. Let's test. There you go.